Harry felt more than a little dizzy as he opened his eyes and looked up at all the people staring down at him. They all looked very concerned, with a couple of Hufflepuff girls looking downright panicked. When he gave them a faint smile, they burst out in sobs of relief. "We're so sorry, Harry," they assured him in a simultaneous wail. "I think we should get you to Madame Pomfrey," Hermione stated in concern. Harry sat up and looked around. "I feel fine now, more or less." Hermione harumphed and crossed her arms over her chest. "It's the less I'm concerned about. Come on." Harry sighed in defeat and let her pull him to his feet. To his dismay, he felt a little bit woozy. It was probably a good thing she was insisting he go to the hospital wing. Right, so class dismissed," Harry informed the members of the DA. "Not entirely sure when the next meeting will be, but we'll let you know as soon as we can." "All right," the class mumbled in agreement. "See you later, Harry." A few minutes later, Harry and Hermione were entering the hospital wing. Ron had stayed behind to help make sure that the rest of the class left in small numbers and wouldn't attract attention. Madame Pomfrey spotted Harry and sighed as if she had known that it was only a matter of time before she had to treat him again. "What's the matter?" Harry shrugged and Hermione rolled her eyes. "We were practicing our stunning and shield charms in our common room, just the three of us, and Ron and I accidentally hit Harry with both at the same time. Harry was knocked out, probably from the stunning spell, but he couldn't be revived with an enervate until the third try and then seemed a bit groggy. I thought it would be best if he was looked at in case something went wrong." "Good thinking, Miss Granger. We'll make a proper healer out of you yet," Madame Pomfrey praised with a fond smile. The Mediwitch cast a few diagnostic spells, frowning in thought. "Are you sure you only use stunning and shield charms?" Hermione frowned in return. "Well, I thought so." Pomfrey sighed. "Then you are probably right. It's just that I'm detecting a hint of a third spell in here, and I don't know which one it is. I dare say that while mixing up a stunning and a shield charm would probably be harmless, the third one could potentially affect Mr. Potter adversely. That said, he seems to be fine. No pain or anything I need to keep him overnight for." "All right," Harry murmured in relief. "Then I can go back to my dorm. I'm feeling really tired and just want to wink and go to sleep." He gasped when he realized what he had said, and slapped a hand over his mouth in horror. Madame Pomfrey chuckled rather dryly. "It seems that the third spell might have removed the tact filter from between your brain and mouth. Don't worry, Mr. Potter. I'm well aware of what young men get up to in private, and am not offended. Off you go." Feeling like his cheeks were on fire from embarrassment, Harry would have ran from the room, if Hermione wasn't clutching his arm. She was also mildly pink, but seemed to decide to act like Harry hadn't said anything. They walked to Gryffindor Tower quickly, chatting about the potions essay due in 2 days. Everything was fine until Harry and Ron went to their dorm. Neville, Dean, and Seamus were already in there getting ready for bed. Since it was winter, the fire was roaring in the fireplace, making the room stiflingly hot. Without thinking, Harry completely stripped off and scratched his bum as he set about rearranging his bedding. Mate?" Ron asked in amusement. "It's not like you to sleep starkers." Harry shrugged. "It's too hot to care." "You're not wrong about that," Seamus muttered, wiping some sweat from his forehead. Harry crawled into his bed once the blanket had been rolled to the foot of the bed and his sheet was pulled back for him. "Good night, all. Please don't try to talk to me because I plan to have a nice long wink." Harry cut himself off with a gasp of astonishment. "Sorry." Ron, Dean, and Seamus heckled him for a minute or so before leaving him alone. Harry had shut his curtains and firmly ignored them all until Neville decided to act like a mature friend and called out, "Good night, Harry. Sweet dreams." Harry chuckled. "Thanks, Nev. You too." The next morning, Harry was still every bit as naked as he had been when he fell asleep. He slipped out of bed and scratched his bum some more as he trudged into the ensuite bathroom for their dorm. Ron raised a brow in amusement. "Oi, put on some clothes, mate." "Up yours, wanker," Harry called back, flipping him a 2-fingered salute. "I'm still too hot for that." "Are you planning to walk through the entire castle naked, then?" Seamus asked in extreme amusement. "Might do," Harry muttered as he had his slash, now itching his sweaty head. He'd definitely need a shower to stop feeling like an itchy ball of wool. When he was done, he felt a bit more awake, and still strutted around their dorm naked. Ron was now biting on his lip in concern. Is this some weird result from being hit by spells last night? Harry shrugged. It might be. Madame Pomfrey did say something about not having a tact filter between my brain and my mouth at the moment. The door to their dorm had opened as he said that, and Hermione responded in agreement before squeaking in alarm at seeing Harry naked and slapping a hand over her eyes. Sorry! Harry frowned and bit his lip as he thought this over. Very strangely, he wasn't embarrassed. At all. Hermione, could not having a tact filter make me, not care? Like now, for instance. I am not attracted to you in the slightest, so I really don't care if you see me naked. Still keeping a hand over her eyes, Hermione stepped more fully into the room and shut the door so that the rest of their housemates didn't come over and stare through the open door. Well, I suppose. It could be an impulse control issue. Perhaps what Madame Pomfrey was talking about is not caring about social expectations, such as modesty, nudity, and what is or is not appropriate to say. Which could explain why Harry called me a wanker, Ron added, chewing on his bottom lip in thought. He and the rest of the boys had gotten dressed while Harry was in the shower, since Harry had been the last to wake, and they'd all had their showers before him. Meanwhile, Harry was now laying shamelessly on his bed, on his stomach, swinging his legs back and forth. The general dampness of his hair and skin actually felt really nice compared with the heat of the room. Neville hummed in thought and shook his head. I don't think that's necessarily it. Harry is actually a very nice person, even when people are being mean to him. Sure, he can get sarcastic and snippy, but he's not the type of person to just call someone names. Hermione laughed softly, shifting to look at Neville with a hand along the side of her face to block Harry from her sight. Well, yes, Harry is. However, he's usually in possession of a fully functioning tact filter, so maybe Harry secretly hides a snarky beast inside him that's just now being let out. I can see that, Harry stated in agreement. I'm usually so concerned with people liking me because they often hate me for no reason. He glanced at Seamus for a second, reminding them that Seamus had been very mad at Harry for a good portion of the beginning of the year for saying that Voldemort had returned. That I hold back a lot of the sort of mean things I'm tempted to say. So, Ron reasoned with a frown, you mean that the real you is a right bastard and you'd just keep that hidden? Harry shrugged. Maybe. Hermione sighed. I think I should bring you back to Madame Pomfrey after breakfast. Whatever, Harry muttered. His stomach growled, making him realize that he actually was very hungry. Only that could have prompted him to get dressed just then, since he was more or less relaxed and content at the moment. He also probably would have skived off all classes because he just did not give a fuck about them at the moment, except that if he was getting dressed anyway, he may as well attend them. It could be fun to mouth off and see if he could set a record for most points taken away in a single day. Not to mention detentions racked up. He slipped out of bed, pulled on his school robes, and then slipped into a pair of mismatched socks that Dobby had given him at some point. Lastly, he pulled on his shoes. Ron snickered and shook his head. Technically, Harry was wearing everything that was required. He just wouldn't be able to open his robes if he got hot, at least not without risking expulsion. About 10 minutes later, the boys and Hermione were walking into the Great Hall. Harry wasn't really paying attention to the conversation since he was so hungry that he was tempted to run ahead of the rest of them and grab the first bit of food he saw, on someone's plate or not. The moment they entered the Great Hall, Harry sat at the nearest part of the Gryffindor table he could reach. He then proceeded to shove food in his mouth at an alarming rate, barely chewing before he swallowed. He actually did steal a glass of milk from the person sitting next to him, who glared at him for a moment before harumphing and ignoring him. In just 5 short minutes, Harry ate almost as much as Ron ate in a half an hour, which was almost as much as Dudley ate in about 20 minutes, and far more than Harry was used to eating. He felt full rather abruptly and heaved a couple of times before his stomach decided that he'd be fine if he stopped eating that second. He nearly ignored that very good warning to finish off his apple pastry, but just then Draco entered the hall. Harry stood up rather abruptly, having no real idea why his feet were moving away from the Gryffindor table. His dorm mates thought he was going to the bathroom or something, while Hermione wondered if he was trying to get out of going to see Madame Pomfrey. She'd drag him by his ear if she had to. But no. Harry stopped in front of Draco, who had also stopped just a few feet inside the entrance to the Great Hall when he spotted Harry headed right for him. Draco looked a bit surprised and a lot wary. "Potter?" "Malfoy," Harry growled, making Draco raise a brow in curiosity mixed with disbelief. "Something I can help you with?" Draco sneered almost politely, since they were in front of nearly everyone who lived in the castle, and he couldn't be overtly hostile. Harry hauled back and slapped Draco full across the face. "God, you're such a bloody bastard!" Draco held a hand to his stinging cheek in shock, too shocked to return the insult or physical abuse. The entire hall was silent in shock by this point. Harry continued, "Always acting like you're better than everyone else when you're just a slimy git. You always talk like you think you're the only one who possesses any sort of intelligence, and you always look like anyone you're looking at smells like your goons just shat on them. I honestly have no idea how you can be such a buggering arse. Worse, how in the bloody fucking hell can you be so goddamn gorgeous?" The rant had Draco looking murderous until that last question, after which he was so confused that he couldn't think straight. He honestly couldn't decide if he had heard that right, or if he had just gone temporarily insane from the extremely painful slap. Before anyone dared to breathe lest they miss Harry's next shouted insult, Harry grabbed Draco and seized a kiss so demanding that Draco felt he had no real choice but to return it for a few moments. Then he remembered that they were in the Great Hall in front of everyone, and pushed Harry away rather forcefully. "The fuck do you think you're playing at, Potter?" "Language, Mr. Malfoy!" McGonagall protested as she approached them. "Me?" Draco demanded incredulously. "What about him?" McGonagall gave Harry her sternest frown. "I think 5 points for each swear word, which is 30 by my count from Gryffindor and 5 from Slytherin. And detention for Mr. Potter for that shocking display of violence. I expect you to go straight to my office to discuss this." "Shut up, you old—" Harry's impertinent roar was cut off by Hermione slapping a hand over his mouth and practically strangling him as she fervently apologized. "I'm so sorry, Professor. Harry was hit by 3 different spells last night, and according to Madame Pomfrey, the combination has removed his impulse control. He doesn't really mean any of this." Harry was trying to argue with his best friend, to insist that he meant every word. She countered by holding on to him in a near-death grip. "Wait," Draco blurted out, looking at least half gobsmacked. "You're saying that Potter is acting on every impulse that crosses his mind?" Hermione bit her lip, and rather than respond, dragged Harry out of the Great Hall. He finally managed to break free of her grasp, and the silent hall could just barely make out a couple more swear words before McGonagall stepped out of the hall and closed the door with a flick of her wand. Draco had slipped back out of the hall behind her. "Let go of me, Hermione, before I hex you!" "Harry, you're not thinking straight. I need to get you to Madame Pomfrey." "I don't want to go to her. She'll make me stop doing whatever I want." "She'll fix you before you push everyone you love away." Harry now had his wand out, but Hermione was quicker. "Stupefy!" Hermione cried out over the severing charm Harry was trying to cast on her wand hand. With an exhaled sigh that suggested that she was used to dealing with people trying to get the best of her in duels, she rapidly followed up with a mobile corpus. Then she marched along, magically carrying Harry in front of her. "Sorry again, Professor. I'll get him to Madame Pomfrey, and you can give him 1,000 detentions for his bad behavior when she fixes him." McGonagall chuckled very softly for a moment as she followed Hermione. "I'm glad to see that you were prepared, Miss Granger. I must confess that I was too shocked to stop Mr. Potter, and I'm very glad you did." "Well, Harry hasn't been himself all morning, so I sort of was prepared," Hermione replied with a shrug. 20 points to Gryffindor for sheer preparedness. "Is there something you need, Mr. Malfoy?" McGonagall asked when she realized that Draco was lurking in the background and following them. Draco exhaled in aggravation, but shook his head. He abruptly spun around and stalked back toward the Great Hall. It was open again by this point, with a couple of professors watching to see if they would be needed. But they hadn't seen what had happened, so were curious as to why Harry was unconscious and being levitated away. Once back inside the great hall, Draco smirked and gestured over his shoulder. Ha! The not-so-great Harry Potter was just utterly defeated by a girl. Not so tough after all, is he? Harumphing in a sort of mildly malicious glee, he made his way to the Slytherin table. Everyone was more or less silent as they waited to see if Malfoy had anything else to say. After a moment, Blaise droned, "So, what was it like being snogged by the so-called Golden Boy?" Draco had been sincerely hoping that everyone would forget that. He dropped his forehead into his palm and hissed in frustration. If he were honest, it had been glorious. Disgusting. Right, Blaise drawled as he rolled his eyes. Worst moment of my life, Draco added. Uh-huh, Blaise stated in a way that meant the exact opposite of mild agreement. Is that why you snogged him back? Oh, just shut it, Draco roared as he loaded his plate with food. His face was rather pink now, and he sincerely wished he could just hide under the table or something. Sure, Blaise agreed with an impertinent grin. Whatever you want. After that, the hall devolved into whispered speculation and giggles, as they discussed what exactly it meant that Harry Potter, almost immediately upon losing his impulse control, had first smacked and then snogged the boy he claimed to hate. As for Ron, he was now holding his head in his hands and fervently praying that he would stop uncontrollably imagining exactly what it was that Harry had probably winked to last night.